But for me, this is clear evidence that Putin doesn't seriously want peace. He's dragging his heels, and that's why today is a really important opportunity to work with colleagues to make sure that we are absolutely united. And President Zelensky will be here today, so we will be discussing the situation with him.
There is ample evidence that neither Berlin, nor Paris, nor Brussels, especially London, want any kind of peace in Ukraine whatsoever.
Okay, so those were both comments made by leaders on each side of this discussion in Istanbul today, saying that the other side doesn't even want peace. So if that's your entry point, I think you know how the rest of the talks went, and that's exactly what we've seen here. Just real briefly, what we've seen so far, these talks lasted an hour and something, so they didn't last very long. And I actually think, and I'll explain why as we go through this episode, that both sides got what they wanted out of it, with the possible exception of the American side, which ironically is the one we're trying to push all this. And I think we were the one side that didn't get what we want out of it, but that's also kind of self-inflicted, as you'll also see as we go through here. And then toward the end here, I'm going to tell you, here's all the things that despite what all people are saying, here's kind of the bottom line of where this is, and then we'll tell you where we think things are going next. So first of all, with that said, interestingly, so there were multiple meetings here today, by the way. It wasn't just Russia and Ukraine, but there was also meetings by the United States, Britain, Germany, France, Ukraine. There was meetings between the U.S., Ukraine, and Turkey as well. So a lot of meetings going around it, one of which was attended, or a couple of which were attended by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And he was asked about how he thought things went after the fact.
Frankly, at this point, I think it's abundantly clear that the only way we're going to have a breakthrough here is between President Trump and President Putin. It's going to require that level of engagement to have a breakthrough in this matter. I don't think anything productive is actually going to happen from this point forward until they engage in a very frank and direct conversation, which I know President Trump is willing to do. Well, the president is impatient to end this war. He's impatient, as he's been clearly said, that something needs to happen soon. Too many people are dying. There's too much destruction. And I think he's ready to have that engagement and determine once and for all if there's a path forward and what that path is. And it's my assessment that I don't think we're going to have a breakthrough here until the president and President Putin interact directly on this topic.
Okay, that's a little odd, I got to say, for you to be coming in now and saying, I don't think that there's going to be a breakthrough until Trump and Putin meet. Trump and Putin have already talked. Steve Witkoff has been to Moscow at least 3 times that I'm aware of, one of which lasted 5 hours by itself. I think there's a pretty good, clear understanding in both directions of what's required to reach an end of war negotiated settlement. You don't have to meet in person, face to face, to figure this out, or based on those conversations that you would have any presumption that this particular talk would yield something. I think everybody really knew ahead of time. And look, the European side with Ukraine really signaled all their intentions at the first of the week, where they had that big meeting at first, where all 5 of the leaders of Ukraine, Germany, France, Poland, and the UK all were walking, kind of looking really cool. Where they said, we demand a ceasefire by Monday, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire that Russia must agree to, or there will be sanctions levied. By the way, Monday came and went. There was no 30-day ceasefire. At least as of now, there hasn't been any sanctions levied. So that already makes the West look kind of impotent, because you made this big, bold pronouncement and then nothing happened. Russia then, subsequent to that, offered that actually he didn't even talk about 30-day ceasefire, because they've already addressed that. That's not on the table. They won't do an unconditional ceasefire, period. They might do a ceasefire as long as there are conditions applied to it that they accept, but that they won't do one unconditionally. However, they will make direct negotiations with the Ukraine side. Now, that is meaningful, because it kind of gets lost in a lot of the noise going on here. But there hasn't been any direct negotiations, at least officially, between Russia and Ukraine since the Istanbul Agreement in 2022. Now, when Putin made his offer to meet at the appropriate level, which the Russians specified from the beginning, which was never even suggested on the Russian side that it would include Vladimir Putin, they specifically tied it to the Istanbul agreements in 2022. They basically said, we'll go back to Istanbul. That's the reason they chose that location, to tie it to the end of the war that could have happened back in 2022. So that was specifically stated. That's an important factor, which you'll see in just a second. One of the other things, though, that Rubio should be understanding, and why it's odd that he would make that statement, that the Russians have never changed their positions. They have been almost ironclad since June of last year, when Putin on June the 14th put out his terms. All 4 of the administrative borders of the oblast, demilitarization, denazification, and no NATO. That's the entry level. It's still the case right now. All since Trump has been in office, all through their phone calls, all through the diplomatic meetings, they've never changed all that. They're still saying that today, by the way, with a little caveat. Today, they're making some additional comments. More on that in a second. In his response to this, after this meeting, because again, you're going to see a picture of Volodymyr Zelensky here in his response to this. And this is why I say this was, everybody got what they wanted out of it, because Zelensky, with his dramatic demands of Vladimir Putin, guaranteed that none of the things he asked for would happen, of course. So he had already planned on the talks failing, and then he was going to make some comments. So dutifully he did. And if I told you last Sunday, I think it was, where he was flanked by the 4 European leaders, today he's at another meeting in Albania, another lavish style, and he's kind of the center of attention. And you see all these leaders from all over Europe around him, rapt attention to everything he's saying. So he kind of gets what he wants out of it. But here's what he's saying about it.
The Ukrainian delegation has a mandate to make decisions. As we saw yesterday, Russia sent almost the same people it sent in 2022. They show that Russia has not changed its basic approach. They make many statements, many threats, but solve nothing. They are doing everything they can to turn this Istanbul meeting into a staged, empty process, just like the ones in 2022. The United States, President Trump wants to end this war. We need to keep working closely with President and stay as coordinated as possible. Long-term U.S. support is also essential. An American backstop is needed. It's important that we all work together on every level to make that happen.
So you see that Zelensky's right there. He's saying lots of things he repeated in the past. But one thing, don't miss this. He's trotting out Trump's name again. And he's saying he still wants a backstop, a security backstop from the United States. He's still looking for security guarantees. He's still looking for a 30-day ceasefire on his terms. He's still looking for an end-of-war negotiation that doesn't require him to give up territory. He still wants to keep an army of whatever size he wants, so that he has security associations and relationships with other European nations or with NATO, et cetera, all of which is off the table here. But Trump has said there's not going to be any NATO. He said there's not going to be any American security guarantees. He said that. But other people, like Secretary of Defense Hegseth, has been very adamant that there won't be either of those two things there. So one has to wonder, and by the way, he also mentioned in elsewhere, both last Sunday as well as prior to this meeting here, that they always talk about that they talked with the United States and they're in agreement with us on this. Well, so then we have to ask the question again, back to Rubio a second ago. If this is what Ukraine is saying, and you know that that's what they're saying because they tell you that privately and publicly, and you know this is what Russia's saying, why do you think that there's going to be any kind of an outcome when the two sides are off the charts apart from each other? There's been no narrowing of the range so far. There's been nobody has come up and making it even close to saying we're getting ready. Now, for his part, Trump was also asked today, where are you on all of this?
We're going to get it done. We got to get it done. 5,000 young people are being killed every single week on average, and we're going to get it done.
Were you surprised when Zelensky didn't show up either, sir? Were you surprised when Zelensky didn't show up either?
No, he didn't show up because he heard Putin wasn't going. So
when do you think you'll meet the president?
As soon as we can set it up. I would actually leave here and go.
Listen, if stuff that Rubio said was making us not look very good, this doesn't make us look good either. because it makes it look like that we're all over the map. The Western side is literally all over the map. You have the Ukraine side saying one thing, you have the European Union and their leaders saying stuff. And there was a ton of comments I could have put in there today, but pretty much they were all the same thing, that Russia bad and Ukraine good, and they should be forced to do whatever we want them to, more sanctions are coming, etc. And then you have Trump, who sometimes says, we're going to walk away. I've shown you several times the comment that he made from Kristen Welker on the U.S. media, where he said, hey, we could be days away from walking. If people don't, show me that there's reason on both sides to have a negotiated settlement, we're going to walk. Well, this was graphic evidence that both sides are still miles away, and they're saying nearly the opposite things. And yet Trump is saying, yeah, well, I would have gone to talk to Putin tomorrow. I still would. So we want to get that settled. You're not going to settle something like this by you talking to Vladimir Putin, because let me tell you what would happen. I guarantee this. You can say there's some things you can speculate on or have a high probability. I can tell you with absolute certainty that based on all of my experience and knowledge and studying this situation, well, I mean, I've been studying with Russian stuff for decades, but certainly intimately since this war began, is that Putin would tell him, okay, I'm happy to have a 30-day ceasefire. I'm happy to end this war. All you guys have to do on the other side, all four of the administrative borders of those four oblasts, Crimea is definitely ours forever. They're going to have to demilitarize their country down to some small number. They're going to have to denazify, and of course, no NATO ever. Now, if you'll do that, then today we'll announce that there'll be a full 30-day ceasefire. Russia has said that. They have said that emphatically. And they even said prior to this that in terms of negotiating points, the Russian media reported that the Russian side said, we will contemplate a ceasefire at these agreements, at this talks here, but with those conditions. So I don't know what Trump is thinking he's going to do, because unless Trump can walk into that meeting and tell all of the European folks and the Ukrainian leader that this is what I'm going to agree to, and you either agree to it or it's going to be between you guys. Because if he doesn't get that, then what is the point of going into the Vladimir Putin? Because Putin's not going to change his views. He's just going to reiterate what his leaders told, or what his negotiators told their counterparts today. But we had, and I'm going to go back to Rubio here, because he makes another comment. He's going to expand a little bit on this issue with Trump and having direct negotiations.
We haven't been chasing this around the world anymore. I mean, that's already happened. I frankly do not believe that we're going to have a breakthrough here until President Trump sits face to face with President Putin and determines what his intentions are moving forward. What I can say with certainty is that the president's, look, he's willing to stick with us as long as it takes to achieve peace. What we cannot do, however, is continue to fly all over the world and engage in meetings that are not going to be productive.
Okay, today is May 16th. 2025. Don't know if you caught the date, but let me show you something that the State Department said. And actually, before I do that, let me back up a little bit further, because on April the 18th, Rubio himself, we've shown you this many times, he stood on a tarmac and just emphatically with staccato voice said, we will walk in days, not weeks, if we can't get this thing narrowed down. He said it again on the 27th of April. Trump said it on May the 4th. And then here on May the 16th, you have Rubio saying, well, we'll continue to engage with this. We're going to continue to talk, etc. And top of everything he had said, here's something that Tammy Bruce, his spokeswoman, said, I think it was earlier this month, May the 1st is the date that she said this. And watch how emphatically she says where they were, not where they would go, but where they were on May 1st.
Our style will change. The methodology of how we contribute to this will change, in that we will not be the mediators. That is what I mentioned on Tuesday, and the nature of how this would change is we certainly we're still committed to it and we'll help and do what we can, but we are not going to fly around the world at the drop of a hat to mediate meetings. That it is now between the two parties, and now is the time that they need to present and develop concrete ideas about how this conflict is going to end. It's going to be up to them. Yes, Eric.
That's Eric? Good right there. That's fine. Listen, here's the problem. So you said that declarative statement on May the 1st, and now May the 16th, at the drop of a hat, you did fly off around the world. You went to Istanbul. You went with the Secretary of State himself, flew off. And then even after these talks ended, instead of saying, all right, that's it, we tried everything, now it's on you, he's still saying, we're going to continue to mediate. We're going to continue to try to talk. We're going to bring the two sides together. And look, as far as it goes, there's nothing wrong per se with following that course of action. If you want to say we want to help bring the parties together, that's fine if you're going to try and mediate something. But when you say authoritatively on the first of the month that you're out, not going to be, but are out, you saw, we're out of it. We're no longer going to do the mediation. And then you do exactly what you said you wouldn't do. Where's your word? Where's the value of what you have to say? Who's going to believe you? Because there's two different parties here, three different parties that won't believe you. One is the European Union. They see you say that, and then they like, okay, well, I'm not going to listen to anything the Americans say because they don't mean any of it. So we're just going to continue to push in ways that we think is good, what we want. And I think that there is some validity to the concern that the European side doesn't want an end to the war. They want it to continue on. Their actions say that. Whatever their words are is inconsequential. When the actions and the words don't match, we always go with the actions. And all they're talking about is continuing the war. Obviously, the Ukraine side, Zelensky. Remember, back to that infamous explosion in the Oval Office at the end of February. Zelensky said whatever he wanted to do. He went to Europe and had applause and all this background stuff. That we keep saying all these things. We had the Rubio from April all the way through saying, we're days away from walking. We're days away from walking. The president, and then now here we are. May the 16th, and we're not walking anywhere. And now then we just have an open-ended deal. We're just going forward. So Zelensky's not going to listen to anything we say either. He's going to continue to do what he wants, which is to push for the unattainable, politically, diplomatically, militarily. And as I point out every time, and I need to do it here because it's so central importance, every day he does that, more people die. Now, I have said previously that by pushing these things off and to ignore the diplomatic off-ramp that exists, the ugly deal as it is now, it's going to get uglier the longer we go. So that's already playing out right here. And not merely it's uglier, but more of his own people are paying the ultimate sacrifice. They're dying in large numbers. They're doing it every day. And there is no hope whatsoever of reversing this ever. Now, unfortunately, Zelensky's not the only one in that delusional mindset. Also, the Europeans. I've talked about a lot of the leaders there, and you saw Starmer making a comment from earlier today. Here is Sir Michael Clarke on the British television explaining to you how that actually they're probably in a good position because this is a stalemate anyway.
There's something of a diplomatic charade going on in Istanbul today. In a sense, it's all orchestrated by the Russians, who are trying to avoid any real commitment to a ceasefire. So they're playing for time, as we knew they would from last week onwards, and the international community can't really do very much about it. So now as we get into the campaign season, the Russians will push even harder. And so they're making some gains around Lyman. They're making some gains around Toretsk, but the Ukrainians are pushing back. The Ukrainians are still holding Pokrovsk, even though the Russians have tried to get all the way around it, but they still can't. And the Russians themselves still can't take Chasiv Yar, which is a really important centre for going northwards to take the whole of the Donbass. Here's the key thing. Over a year ago, in February last year, February 2024, the Russians took Avdiivka. That was a really important strategic gain for them, a really important strategic loss for the Ukrainians. Over a year later, 15 months later, they're only 30 miles further on. They still haven't taken Pokrovsk. That tells you all you really need to know about what's going on in the war. It's a bit of a stalemate.
Yeah, that doesn't tell you all you need to know. And I'm going to tell you what you really need to know. And part of it was revealed in the New York Times a couple of days ago when they explained that, you know what, actually, there has been a pretty sizable amount of territory that was lost. Gary, if you can throw that full screen up on there, that's the one. Thank you. They heading into these negotiations, the New York Times said that Russia is taking inches on the battlefield, but demanding miles in talks. But when you read down into the bottom part of that article, into the details, it says that over the past 16 months, as Russian forces seized the initiative, Moscow took 1,827 square miles of Ukraine, an area smaller than Delaware, according to the dead. So he wants to minimize that anywhere. But then they continue on. In wars of attrition, incremental gains can presage a breakthrough if the losing side runs out of troops and ammunition and the defensive lines finally collapse. This may be what Russia's counting on. Ukraine, whose wartime population is less than a quarter of Russia's, has lost many soldiers holding the line. Well, yeah, no kidding. See, that's why, and we've had Andrei Martyanov, we've had Colonel Jacques Beau, former NATO official or officer. Everybody that understands the issues of war, I think Commodore Germany from former UK Commodore, they all say Russia is operating on a different strategy than the West. They're not primarily focused on taking territory, though they are, as you see, 1,800 square miles, not an insignificant amount of territory. But what the article didn't even talk about, it talked about what the Russians' alleged casualties were, which were significant. And I'm sure they are significant, though probably not as high as what was claimed in there. But they didn't even address on the Ukraine side. And it is substantially higher, and it is catastrophically high. And even they had to concede that occasionally you can wear down another side. Russia's fighting an attritional war. We've been talking about this. Alex Vershinin at the Royal United Services Institute published an article a year ago that laid out in graphic detail. Russia is fighting a war of attrition. They're not fighting a war of maneuver the way the West does, because their objective is not merely to capture territory. Their objective is to create security on their western flank by demilitarizing their enemy so that they don't have the capacity to threaten them in the future, ergo demilitarization. And they'll either get that done militarily through a voluntary demobilization of their troops down to some given number, or they'll kill them all. And that's what they are actually physically doing. They're continuing to go down that path. And listen, so when you have guys like Michael Clark and some of these other folks and some of these heads of state or Zelensky himself, they keep telling you over and over, we'll just keep fighting. We'll keep going. We're going to put sanctions. We're going to force Russia with economic pain and economic pressure to submit to what we want and to end the war on terms we have, which, by the way, they almost never quantify. When they say a just and lasting peace, and they understand that some of the territory will go back, apparently the most they ever contemplate is the current line of contact right now. And then even according to General Kellogg, his great plan the other day was that they would then withdraw 15 kilometers back. And so they would have this big 30-kilometer zone between them, which would completely obliviate everything that Russia has been paying this price to get while they're in the strong position. Obviously, they're not going to do that. Nobody would. We would definitely not do that. If we were in the position, superiority militarily, I assure you, we would never give in to the other side, the lower side, and let them call the terms. So it blows my mind, and it just is irrational as it can be for us on the losing side to think that we're going to get them to do this, which we wouldn't even do if we were on the superior side. So everything that we're talking about here leads to one conclusion only, and that they're trying to extend the war. That they are delusional, that they think that maybe sometime in the future, years down the line, that Russia will slow down. And I don't even know what they would think that was going to accomplish if Russia did slow down and they ran out of steam or something. That still doesn't get the other side. That doesn't affect your side of the calculation, which is you don't have enough manpower to operate. You don't have enough ammunition, weapons, or artillery pieces, tanks, etc. It's certainly not aircraft. By the way, another F-16 was lost by the Ukraine side yesterday. That makes at least 3. Obviously, they never made any difference. So everywhere you want to look, it's just illusion. And every day that you see more Ukrainian men pay the ultimate price with their lives, they'll never get it back. And so that's why I say several times it is immoral, it is irrational, it is illogical for the West to continue going down this side. I want to take a look at some of the details, though, in the last few minutes we have here about what has been reported from this today's talks. Even though they were relatively short, there was some pretty meaningful things that came out of it. I have gleaned through before we came on air today Russian media, Ukraine media, and Western media, both U.S. and European. And we have a lot of crossover where a lot of things are agreed to. So we have pretty good confidence that these things they're accurate here. First of all, the UAF, Ukraine Armed Forces, entered the discussion, and their primary thing was to, again, lay out their view. Both sides said, we will enter this, and they would present their views to the other side. The Ukraine side led off with, we want a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, then we're willing to talk details and negotiations. The Russian side said, okay, our point is we're going to say we want, shocker, all 4 administrative borders of the Ukraine, the administrative borders of those 4 oblasts that we have annexed into our country. We want you to immediately withdraw all of your military forces back to the administrative borders on the other side of that. And then it goes on from there. So they basically just repeated what we've been talking about in the open before. But then the Russian side, according to media on both sides of the line here, said they added something additional. Now then they say, but if you don't give us these 4 territories, then we're also going to take a 5th one, probably Kharkiv. We're also going to have a big buffer zone, which may take most of or even all of Sumy on top of that. So if you don't agree to these terms here, then we're going to keep fighting until we get all of it and additional territory on top of that for our own security. That's what they're saying. Ukraine side wasn't really hip with a lot of that. And they continued to say, the Russian side said the reason why we won't even contemplate a ceasefire first, even though everybody in the West says it's of course you have to do it. You have to have a ceasefire first, but how can you even talk about the details of the negotiations afterwards? Well, number one, that happens a lot. Look at the Korean War, for crying out loud. I think that was close to 2 years of fighting while the negotiations to try to reach even an armistice were reached. So hardly uncommon. But be that as it may, the Russian side said, we have a very practical reason why. And they cite the example of the Minsk agreements. They say part of that resulted in a ceasefire of the civil war that was raging between the Russian separatists in the eastern part of the Donbass, of Ukraine in the Donbass, and then the Ukrainian army that was fighting this civil war against them. They said, we agreed to a ceasefire then, and then we said, then we'll work on the details. And then they ended up signing those protocols, but the protocols were never employed. They never did. They never changed the constitution. So the Russian side said that with their allies in the east, they said, we never withdrew all of our stuff beyond the area that was required either, because you didn't do the central part of it, which was a prerequisite for the next part. So they said, we're not going to do that again, because we stopped fighting then, our side and our allies, and then nothing else ever happened. So now then we're not going to cease the fire here, because that will not only strengthen your side, but then the experience tells us that you'll never abide by anything else. You'll never agree to the actual terms. So now then they're saying, what we're going to do from a position of strength where we can do this, we're going to keep moving to the west. We're going to keep fighting until you either agree to it or we take it on the battlefield. Sounds familiar if you've been watching our show. We had Ambassador Polyansky, their deputy UN ambassador for Russia, who went on our show and told us exactly that in rather direct, unambiguous terms. So it's all out there for anybody to see. And the anguishing part is you had Trump, who had the leverage to bring this war to an end. If he is motivated, as he said, by these alleged 5,000 people dying per week, I think the number is probably higher on both sides of the line together, but that's high enough. If he was concerned about that, he had the leverage in his hand when he was inaugurated into office. He could have just said, okay, that's it. We're walking away, because y'all aren't closing your the negotiating positions here. He could have said, Ukraine, you guys have to give in. You have to acknowledge, I'm going to lose all these territories. Acknowledge it, not just on Crimea. I'm going to acknowledge this here, and then we have something to work with. But if you're not going to acknowledge anything, and then I've shown you, I think it was just yesterday, I showed you something from, I believe it was the 16th of February, where Zelensky said, this war will end when we have victory and Putin's in jail, and we're not going to give anything away. So when Zelensky said that should have been Trump's saying, then you're on your own, my friend. If you don't want to exist in the real world and you want to try to achieve the unattainable diplomatically and militarily, have at it. If you guys in Europe want to facilitate and spend more of your money on a lost war, that's your affair. You're an independent entities, you're independent countries, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to do that. That's what he should have done. Then they wouldn't have been able to continue on. The European side said as much. They said, we have to have an American backstop. Ukraine today said we need an American backstop. Without the backstop, we can't keep on with the fiction. So that's what needs to happen here. Doug McGregor said it on our show so many times over many months, ever since Trump got it, actually before he even got inaugurated. And yet that hasn't been done. And then we say stuff like we did in April, that we're days away from concluding that and walking away, and then we don't do it. So that signals to the Russian side that we don't mean anything. It signals to the European side that we're not going to constrain you. It signals to the Ukrainian side that I can just blow you off and just still try to keep getting stuff from you. And we've nickel and dimed them. They have gotten some stuff. So they have succeeded in getting some stuff from Trump and giving nothing. And still using his name as a rock to throw at Russia, as he did earlier today. All of this stuff is going to just extend the war, and it's going to almost certainly result in a lot worse outcome for the Ukraine side. The war is over. That it's determined already. The Ukraine side lost, period, full stop. The Russian side won. Everything that we have done for now going into the fourth year of war, for the NATO side, for Europe, United States, everything, Ukraine, all of it has failed. And there will be a reckoning. We are going to have to deal with this stuff at some point. And the longer you wait to acknowledge reality, the deeper the cost, the bigger the price, and the harder it's going to be later on, even for us. And by the way, Secretary of State of Defense Lloyd Austin from the previous administration, you set as an example, an objective to weaken the Russian side. Congratulations, because everything that has happened since then, and unfortunately that rolls into the current administration and definitely Europe, all you have served to do is weaken our side, because our inventories are much smaller now of all the key ammunition and weapon systems, tanks, artillery pieces, air defense systems, and certainly air defense interceptor missiles, critical things, drones, all this stuff. Our inventories are much smaller now than they were before the war. Russia's are off the charts. Russia now has military alliances with North Korea, with Iran. They have their own industrial capacity off the charts, blowing away everything that we do in cumulative. Thanks a lot, Secretary Austin. Thanks a lot, President Biden. You guys did a great job. Keir Starmer now. Boris Johnson before that. Liz Truss, while she was there for a short period of time. Emmanuel Macron, Schultz, Merz, Tusk, all you guys have done nothing but produce the exact opposite of what you've been telling all of our people that you're trying to produce, which is to make us stronger and them weaker. And then the evidence is plain to see. Now, right now, they can still continue the fiction, because the U.S. is enabling them to continue the fiction by staying engaged on their side and refusing to do what I just laid out there. And the Russians, to their side, has not yet conquered everything. They haven't even taken all of the 4 oblasts, much less gone into a 5th and maybe a 6th one. But there has been lots of reports over the last couple of months and in the recent weeks, more and more reporting coming out implying that Russians have been stockpiling large quantities of ammunition, large quantities of rockets, artillery pieces, etc., tanks, and personnel have been seen massing in certain areas of the front, both in the east and in the north. And look, I thought that something was going to happen before. I've been talking about this for several months. But now that the weather is ideal, it is actually perfect to launch a late spring or mid-spring, early summer offensive. The weather is going to be ideal for that. The reports are there. Whether Russia does that, whether they act on it, or whether they just say, we're going to be patient and we're going to continue going on with these tactics and operational moves that minimize the risk to our troops and maximize the firepower on the Ukraine side, they can do either one. They can say, that's fine. All this hubbub today, we're just going to keep methodically doing what we're doing. And then a year from now, maybe they'll be at the Dnieper River. That's kind of the concern that there is. And unfortunately, we're not paying any attention to that. One of the media outlet today, Russia actually has, Gary, I don't remember if I sent you that full screen. Did I send that one where it has a map where you can see it? Yeah. Yes, that one. Thank you. This is what Russia's reporting today. If you don't leave the Donbass, we will take the Dnieper. We've been talking about that along. Well, now here the Ukrainian side is saying it. And that one of this media here reports in particular, according to Ukrainian sources, The Russian delegation allegedly put forward extremely harsh conditions to Kiev, demanding not only the withdrawal of the forces to Ukraine from the territory of those 4 regions, but also the creation of a security zone in Sumy. Otherwise, Moscow warned that it would establish control over Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk regions by force. Ergo, they would go virtually and maybe even beyond all the way to the Dnieper River. So now the Russians are saying that. And so you have to say, if you're on the Western side, you can say, well, that's just propaganda. They're not going to do it. But the folks who have access, and I don't, to classified information should be able to look and see what have the Russians been doing? Where have they been stockpiling information? How much ammunition do they have? How many rounds? All those kinds of things. Those things are knowable. And if they know these things and are still saying what they're saying, then history is going to be very, very cruel to them. Their own populations are not going to take it well if they've been lied to, and these guys had the ability to do what I just talked about. They could have ended the war on the terms that I just mentioned. It was in their power to do it, and they didn't. Then you see that the Russians are going to end this war with everything they want and be in an even stronger position than they are today, much stronger than they were in February of 2022. That's what we're facing, folks. That's the reality of here. That's your deep dive here, because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth, no matter what it is. And when our leaders are doing things that make no sense at all, that are detached from reality, we're going to call that out. And this is not even a pro-Russian side. This is a pro-truth side. This is the situation here. Our leaders have already cost us so much. Our leaders have already taken actions that have just obliterated entire generations of Ukrainian men as we claim to stand up for freedom and democracy for them. We are enabling their destruction, even if it's Russia that's conducting the destruction. It's Russian bombs and bullets that are causing the death and destruction. We're enabling it by continuing the war to go on from the side, instead of saying, all right, 2023, the latest, we could have said, all right, after that offensive didn't work, it doesn't make any sense to do. We didn't do it. We're not doing it now. I told you already that the 2022 Istanbul was the best chance to end this war by negotiations. So when it started, would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives of Ukrainians. And I think that this is the last chance here. If we don't take the ugly deal on the table, and now that, as I've warned, the deal is uglier. It's now worse than it was before this meeting here, as at least according to the reports there. The longer you wait and dither, and the more you make these bold statements and in-your-face comments to the Russian side from the Western side, the more you make the latter outcome increasingly probable, an outright military defeat on the Ukraine side. And then you will long for these uglier terms that you could have gotten today. We'll see how that works out. We're going to continue to follow this story for you, folks. And if anything else comes out later, we'll be on top of that, even if over the weekend. You can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you informed and giving you the truth. Thank you very much. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Even if you've already subscribed, hit that like button. That helps us get this message out to more people, because more people need to know the truth like you have. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.